morning, everyone. My name is Nico Franks. I'm a journalist and editor of Channel 21 International Magazine. Welcome to Question Time. Thanks for joining us this morning. Before we start, I'd like to say a great big thank you to our sponsor for this session, which is Factory. The CMC depends on the support of a huge range of sponsors to help create the conference, so it really matters that Factory are in support today. So thank you to them. So welcome, this is Question Time, where we put our questions to a panel of experts. So get ready for some forthright views and new perspectives on some of the hottest strategic and policy talking points facing the children's and youth media business today. So let me introduce the panel. We have Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, and sorry, there's a Fiona Bruce's notes. So can I welcome to the stage our panel? So Maddie Darrell, Seetha Kumar, Faraz Osman, Mark Goodchild, and Michael Shields. So on my left, I have Maddie Darrell, who founded kids and family indie Darrell McQueen in 2000, and since then has produced for all the big names, and more recently, streamers like Netflix and Apple TV+, and pioneering along the way serialized drama for under 8s. Next to her, we have Michael Shields, who Michael has led creative teams in senior roles at the BBC, and now Akamar Films, producer of the hit preschool show Bing. And to his left, we have Faraz Osman, who set up creative agency Goldwalla in 2018, having held roles including editor of education at Channel 4 and commissioned E4's highest-rated documentary, Don't Blame Facebook. And next to him, we have Seetha Kumar, who has led Screen Skills since 2015, and that's an organization set up to identify and meet the current and future skills needs of the UK screen industries, and used to be known as Creative Skill Set. And then last but not least, at the end there, Mark Goodchild, TV executive turned digital product specialist, and a former head of digital at both the BBC and Warner Media. So the way this will work, we'll only have time for about 7 questions or so if I could ask the panelists to keep their answers as succinct as possible. Our lead questions have been sourced from delegates in the run-up to the conference, and I will call on them by name to ask their questions. If you would like to ask a question, we do have time for that as well, and you've got 2 options there. You can either put your hand up and go old school, or use Slido with the details shown on the screen down there, and the questions will come to me through that iPad. So let's kick off. Our first question comes from Jane Kirkham.
With the closure of the Young Audiences Content Fund and a budget freeze at the BBC, are we back to market failure in the children's production sector? And what should be done?
Maddie, let's start with you.
Well, I think we could be in a position in the UK of failing kids culturally, socially, and creatively unless we seek out money. I don't have any answers to that, and fresh global opportunities. Yeah.
And obviously, we're talking about this, as I kind of referenced, with the government in yet more turmoil. So all the kind of talking points about policy, they're all up for debate and subject to change, aren't they? Could the Young Audiences Content Fund be saved? Is there a glimmer of hope there?
I think definitely the Young Audiences Content Fund could be saved. I think it's amazing what they achieved in a short period of time. The rise and fall of the fund, it was simply due to political support. And the cancellation of it is ideological. It's not to do with improving the lives of our children or improving resources for programming. So could it be reinstated? Absolutely. Is it going to be reinstated under the current regime? I doubt it.
Yeah, agreed.
I don't know if it is going to be reinstated because, well, I actually don't think it is ideological. I think it's just lazy. I think this government just didn't even know it existed, and they just were like, "Oh, we didn't realise that was a thing," because it's not got big flashy headlines. And I think that obviously it's been incredibly important for the entire industry, And I think that they're starting to recognise that and they don't want a U-turn. So I think it will come back, there'll be more tax breaks, it'll come back in endeavour, guys. I'm actually chairing a panel right here tomorrow with people who've got some great ideas about what the next iteration of it could be. So come along to that, everyone, and find out the future. But I don't, I'm kind of a bit more optimistic. I think the industry is in a bit of is at a real inflection point. And I think the work that Daryl McQueen are doing at Apple TV and Netflix kind of is real testament to that. If SVODs want to stop churn with subscribers, I think they're waking up to the idea that actually it's kids and family content that is going to be the thing that keeps people subscribed to your services. And I think, I'm optimistic about it, and I think we are going to start seeing a golden age of television. I think the question has to be, and to your point, is going to be about this kind of uniquely British content that we need to make sure that we protect, because with the loss of the audience fund, with the license fee freeze and everything that's going on, I think that that's what's under risk, and we need to think really hard about how we can make sure that the international stuff is great, like it's really important, it's going to make loads of money for loads of producers that are hopefully in this room, that's all brilliant, but how can we make sure that we maintain this level of brilliance when it comes to reflecting British lives and values? And that's a challenge that I hope that both we as an industry and the government and everyone else, the stakeholders in it, kind of rise to.
The Young Audiences Fund has done fantastic work in terms of helping engage with the Children's TV Skills Fund, which I think is really key because it's about talent and skills. But it's also enabled a pluralistic viewing experience. But in my view, I'm with Faraz, I think we are at an inflection point. And I kind of think we have an opportunity to really come together, which I know this conference is doing, and really think about what do we mean by public service content for kids in today's world, because the world has changed. How do we define it, and how do we build that? So I think that, for me, is the opportunity.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, the challenge for the the ACT Fund was that the rules changed. Basically, the goalpost changed. The question was about market failure. It coincided with Ofcom, various people talking about market failure between 2013 and 2017, and the ACT Fund with the DCMS initiative, which coincided, which seemed like it was part of the solution, invest in development. Subsequently, it's now, is that the right funding model, top slicing, which are all slightly sideshows. It's not about that. It was about putting money into development. And I think we've got to come to a position where we've got completely new ministers, MPs, who haven't really grown up with understanding the kids' media sector and don't have that history of knowing that that we had market failure in that period. And I think we've got to educate them again, which I know the campaign for the ACT Fund, subsequently, there's been a lot of work talking to MPs, people like Julia Lopez sort of now starting to engage in those conversations. But the challenge I think we're facing is that actually a lot of people in Parliament think we're going through a boom period in children's media. They look at Netflix and they look at all these things. And you could argue that was the case, but not now. We're now at that inflection point, and markets have boom periods and they have a trough, and we're in danger of going into that trough for all of these things, this confluence moment, and therefore we do need to look very carefully about how we support public service in that mix with the international stuff. So I don't think the ACT Fund will survive as it is now, but I suspect we can keep lobbying to try and find some other intervention which will take that good work and maybe morph it somewhere.
Yeah, because it was such a success story, and I know the Children's Media Foundation is campaigning hard for that, because it did seem to solve not all the issues, but the content that it was funding was a lot of it was regional. ITV was commissioning it, and anyone who's been at CMC, over the years knows that was such a big grind trying to get ITV to commission, and now they had started doing it. Do you think they will continue doing it regardless of the ACT Fund? ITV.
So the other big crisis, I suppose, going on at the moment is around advertising. That's been advertising around kids' content has been in decline for a long time. The economics don't make sense. We were hearing yesterday, advertising is now moving more and more digital. YouTube are managing to raise that, but it's fragmented. So I don't know how an advertising-funded broadcaster can make the economics work around funding a healthy, plural content provision just from advertising, partly because the kids don't have money in their pocket. We're going into recession, so there's going to be less money to play for. So I can't see how that can work. I think there has to be some intervention.
Mm-hmm. And our second question kind of ties in, because all these issues are related. So our second question comes from Sally Ann Kaiser.
Hi, everyone. I'd just like to ask, leading on from that, how do you all think the privatisation of Channel 4 could potentially impact the children's and youth sector?
Because when we had seen Channel 4 commission a bit more using the ACT Fund, so how will those two things kind of work? Let's start again with you, Maddie.
I mean, Channel 4 has been a powerhouse for young UK talent, writers, talent across the board. You know, even away from the children's genre, losing Channel 4 is going to be is going to remove 50% of income for indies in the UK. So that's going to be a fact. Do I think it'll happen? I think with the current government, you know, we've got Brexit, we've got, at the moment, the government we've got. I think that they will, it will become potentially a commercial model. And I think, again, that's not great news for indies, because Channel 4 will want to build their own IP, they will want their own content library, and there will be impact. There's no doubt about it.
I think if you look at the history of public service broadcast funding across the world, the BBC is nearly 100 years old. Most of the big terrestrials, Nordic countries, ABC Australia, RAI, NHK in Japan, with the exception of the Americans, were sort of built on a BBC model, and they all had some form of direct funding. And over the years, those funding provisions have all been eroded and nibbled to death, with changes, with more advertising, less direct grants. And what's happened in almost every case is a huge erosion of audience share and national reach, less commissioning, less spend on production, and children's is always one of the areas that gets squeezed. So I think that the structure of funding has an impact on the culture of the organizations, has an impact on the strategy, and it has a huge impact on outcomes. So there's no doubt that if you privatize Channel 4, it will be compelled to become something different, and that will have, I think, have a significant damaging effect on children.
But isn't there the potential for it to be acquired by, so say, Warner Media Discovery? So then it, you know, becomes part of the Cartoon Network family, and you know, now there's a new free-to-air home on Channel 4 for.
I think that's true, but what you'll see is then the tussle that ITV went through with Ofcom and the government to try and erode the obligations, to increase profits, reduce costs. I think that's an inevitable consequence of a change of ownership.
So, full disclosure, I used to be the editor of education. You kind of said so in the intro. Question one, is there anybody in this room from Channel 4? Is anybody in this room making anything for Channel 4? I mean, like that. I mean, this is, and you know, we're not privatised yet. You know, the privatisation question is a big question for British broadcasting. There's no doubt about that. About how we're going to, you know, how independent production companies like mine that are small and diverse-led and have regional bases. You know, we are scared to an extent, but you know, our business hasn't been with Channel 4 so far. They've been a difficult, I would argue, broadcasters to work with. I'm hoping that's going to change. Is it going to change with privatisation? I don't know. But I'm quite clear on this. The remit for Channel 4, exactly as you said, has not been strong enough, and it's not accountable. And so you could argue that the erosion of that remit has made it more attractive for a commercial buyer. And this debate should be about what we should be doing to make that remit more robust in the way that it was when Channel 4 first started. And I'm quite sad that it's going in the other direction, about like, you know, how can we, you know, sand it down so it's more appealing to a, you know, a Warner or a, you know, a Discovery or a Banijay or a private equity firm or whatever it might be. This conversation should be absolutely in the other direction of going, look, you know, the BBC don't do enough for teenagers, they don't do enough for younger adults. You know, is that a thing that Channel 4 should be remitted to do and be accountable for? My answer to that is absolutely yes, and that's not currently happening. And that's where my frustration is, because I think that if we had a Channel 4 that had a clear purpose and remit for the next 5 years, we would have a more interesting conversation about, well, is that going to be better in private hands or public hands? What's going on? I think the problem we have right now is we're being asked as indies to defend Channel 4, and rightly so, because it is important to our business models, and we're worried that the sector will collapse, as the independent production company sector will collapse without Channel 4, but we also need, as a whole industry, to discuss, well, what do we want Channel 4 to be if it isn't privatised? Because if this government does change, which, I don't know, I'm looking at my iPad expecting another resignation any minute now. If this government does change, in any direction, and Channel 4 and this media bill, which I think is probably on shaky ground now, because, who would want to put a bill in front of this, this current House of Commons? To kind of go, well, privatisation is not happening anymore, and we all kind of throw a party and pull some poppers. Great, but what is Channel 4 going to be in public ownership? For me, it can't be business as usual, and we all need to kind of discuss what we expect from a Channel 4 that stays in public hands.
Sita, what's your perspective?
I think, in addition to the points made by my panelists, I think there is a bigger issue right now. In all the years that I've been in the business, there's always been a squeeze on children's television. I know this sounds a bit dramatic, but it is the fact. And it is such a vital part of our ecosystem. And today, we've got the YAG Fund, we've got BBC being squeezed, we've got privatization of Channel 4. And at the same time, you've got this whole picture that Mark talked about of growth. And yet, a lot of that growth has been fueled by this amazing domestic ecology. And that is something precious that we have to find a way to protect. So I come back to the bigger picture about what do we need to do at this moment in time? The world has changed, and how do we fuel our domestic ecology, where children's is a very critical part of it, and think about that, and then the remits can follow about who does what. But I think there's a bigger story there, which we need to personally talk about, debate, and discuss.
We're going to move on to our third question now, which comes from Colin Ward.
Thank you very much. Hi, all. I've got a question about the elephant that's not in the room. Can you guess? With BBC Children's prioritising animation over live action, alongside the plan to put programmes on iPlayer and close the CBBC channel, which is worth noting a small number of children with no internet access do still rely on heavily. And now we also hear that Ofcom no longer intends to impose quotas for children's content on the BBC to give the corporation even greater flexibility. So the question, what can we all do to ensure that the BBC continues to offer the sort of broad, universal media service for children that it provides for adult audiences?
Let's start with you, Mark, on that one.
Okay, so quite a lot of things in there to unpack. So the quotas that existed for the BBC, it's very clear that they are going to get rid of those quotas. The quotas are quite archaic. They're all built around a sort of an infrastructure which is all around linear TV. So I personally think it's absolutely right that they need to get rid of those quotas but reinvent them for a digitally distributed environment, whether that's through iPlayer, through partnerships with YouTube, etc. And that there's a little bit of fine print from Ofcom saying we are looking for BBC to maintain some obligations around genres, but it's very, very vague. And I think it's on us now to lobby Ofcom and take part in consultations to say, fine, linear TV quotas are a thing of the past, but you need something else in place. When it comes to animation versus live action, I worked at Cartoon Network. I think cartoons are amazing. I've always believed also that you need a plural, mixed genre diet to deliver the different areas of entertainment and public service. So I don't think that the push towards doing animation is wrong per se. They're only talking about moving from one series up to four series. It's really about where that gets invested from. And if it's the same pot and there's no more money coming into the BBC, it's got to be taken, and animation we know is expensive. What is subsidising it? And I think that's the bigger question for the people working in live action. Live action, we know, works better for supporting niche audiences, reflecting different cultures, etc. I think it's quite hard to do that in a sort of a homogenous cartoon that is designed to work across multiple audiences, work internationally. So it's about protecting that, going back to what you were saying, is about what does public service broadcasting mean, particularly the bit about reflecting British culture, whether we need cultural tests, all of those sorts of things. And where, if it's a single pot and it's not getting bigger, then we've got a problem. And I would be saying, BBC needs to put its money where its mouth is, higher up the chain. It's not about BBC Children's. More money needs to go into Children's so that they can do the animation and keep doing the live action.
So is the issue that we don't have people higher up enough in the BBC kind of advocating for children's?
Well, I mean,
That's always been.
I have that view. Like, I think that if you look at the current structure of those at the top table of the media industry, the majority of them have come up through news or, in some cases, through entertainment. I can't think of a single name that has done a really strong stint through children's. But I would say that, like, I'm a bit more optimistic about this thing. I feel like this is like the tone of this is a bit like, oh my god, it's all doom and gloom. I'm like, maybe I need to do like a tap dance or something to kind of like bring the vibe up a bit. Like, I'm like massively optimistic about where we are going. I think that like children's play such a vital role in our defense of the license fee, for instance, right? I genuinely think that people would go to war if CBeebies was at risk. It's like, there are things that the BBC does that like nobody would ever dare to touch, and children's is one of those things, and we should all be massively proud in this room and beyond that we are making the sort of content that is really beloved by families up and down the country and worldwide. I think the animation point, and I'm a little bit naive about this, I've never really quite understood it. I wasn't great at maths at school, but like the animation thing, my understanding of it is like, well, actually animation sells worldwide, and when you do deals with BBC Studios, that can be reinvested into what's been made at the BBC. And so like, if we do have more animation hits, which are easier to distribute, that may mean that we get more investment as an industry to kind of continue to bolster the live action. I'm not entirely sure, and I might be wrong, but I'm not entirely sure that it's a bit like, let's take from, in my analogy, like take from Peter to give to Paul. Is that a thing? That's a thing, right? Yeah. So it's like, I don't know if it's like there's a circle of money and then that's it, and it needs to be carved up in a particular way. It could well be that if we have a couple more animation hits, that could give us all the income that we need to make more stuff. But it's quite clear, live action is incredibly important, again, back to my previous point, when it comes to reflecting British culture and British society. Having a kind of anamorphic dog, as funny as it can be, is not relatable when it comes to representation and diversity of what this country looks like, particularly as it grows up. And we need to have more shows. I make factual entertainment shows, and we are doing a factual entertainment show for CBeebies. We really believe that that's part of what we are as a company that's trying to represent diversity and represent what the country looks like currently. You can't do that through animation. It's pure and simple. So my hope is that it's a tweak, and my hope is that because of the strength of what the BBC Children's does, it has this outsized outsized influence of what we do when it comes to the love and the trust of the BBC, and that you tinker with that at your peril, because I think anybody that is running the channel or anybody that's working at the BBC is aware of how important the content is.
I agree really that live action is the key genre to show our communities themselves on screen, whether it's drama, contemporary drama, factual programming, news. It's vital. And I think children need both. I think animation versus live action is nonsense. We do an animated series which isn't really a cartoon, it's a drama. It's well written, it speaks directly to children globally, and I'm as proud of it as any live action show I've ever worked on.
It's Bing?
It's Bing, yeah.
Right, you class it as a drama?
It's a drama, yeah. There's no squash and stretch, the laws of gravity apply, he lives in a house, sleeps in a bed, eats at the kitchen table, and it's about emotions and feelings. That's as close to dramatic storytelling as...
I'd love to see the Bing cliffhanger at the end of season
There you
2.
go,
It's
there
just a
you
bit
go.
like that's going to be amazing. It's a bit like, what's happened to Flop? Where's he gone?
We'll discuss that after this. I just want to say 3 things and bring it back to the audience, right? My plea for this discussion is, we've been working for years now on diversity and inclusion within the company and how we write, how we recruit. I'd like to argue that the biggest minority in the room is children, right? We talk about minorities as people who don't have a voice, don't have political power, don't control the landscape or wealth, right? We're surrounded by them and they're young children. And there's this extraordinary situation where, when it comes to how we look after children medically or how we look after their education, there's a whole pile of concerned advocacy going on across the board. But when it comes to media, somehow it gets neglected. And I think we should argue strongly against that. Why? I mean, if you take our age range, we're a uniquely language-based species. Young children in our category, they develop their cognition, their endocrine systems, their ability to label the world, see each other, communicate with each other, communicate their needs through language, and the equipment they use is story. And we know the results are in that if they don't get that between 0 and 5, they're forever losing something important they can't get back. This is not a trivial thing. This is about the development of little human beings. In 2030, every 10-year-old in the room will be able to vote, okay? If we don't pay attention to advocating noisily for this minority, you'll end up with the casualization of policy, non-joined-up thinking, poor funding, things getting cancelled. The last big splash that made this happen very effectively, to my mind, was the launch of Channel 4 in 1982. And believe me, that was a rumbustious, noisy, argumentative campaign that got something done. So my call is, let's bring our diversity and inclusion mindset, emotion, and power to children because they deserve it.
Sorry, can I just also to add to that as well? I think it's really important that we look at the context of where we are. You know, this is the first CMC we've had back in person. It's really easy to forget what's happened in the last couple of years because we all want to forget it. But BBC Bite-Size Daily, you know, what BBC Education were doing, the homeschooling program that was done, like, this was the sort of stuff that I genuinely think saved the sanity of families and parents and kept the education of our children on track. It's the broadcasting industry that did that.
Yes.
And again, it's like we have to, and that was live action. That wasn't done through animation. That was done through quick turnaround, you know, working with the departments of education, working with the resources that we had, us all coming together as an industry to make sure that we kept our promise and responsibility to this audience that's coming up and coming through, to make sure they get the best possible content that's out there. Like, that was such a powerful thing that happened, and we really, really should be kind of applauding all of ourselves that we came up and stepped up to that challenge in a way that I think the rest of the industry probably fell down on because they were more worried about the fact that they couldn't get like their commuter flat white on the way into doing their high-end drama. It's a bit like, you know, we did something and it was something that really, really should be cherished and demonstrates how powerful this industry is. And that was through live action. And I think that I'd be surprised if anybody is going to pretend that didn't happen because it, I think, really moved the needle again on what our expectations are of the BBC.
Just to add to that, and I think as we emerge from this fairly fractious time, and the pandemic hasn't gone away, COVID cases are still going up, and we are dealing with a society that is healing, that's got mental health issues. Live action, the sense of realness is really important, and I think we need to passionately espouse its cause. And to me, having heard Anishwar yesterday, oh my God, he was the rallying cry for the future. And that's what we need to see in our content as well.
Definitely. And we've got a follow-up question from Professor Marie Messenger-Davies. So, speaking as a licensed fee payer and a lifelong BBC supporter, I have a question. This is a major children's media conference, so why is there nobody here from the BBC to address this major issue in children's media? The BBC's decision, without any public consultation, to move CBBC from a channel to online, in contrast to BBC Three and other PSB providers, CITV and Channel 5, which remain universally available to all children. Mark, as someone, you know, very firmly placed in the digital world, what do you make of CBBC's move?
Moving
online?
CBBC off linear. So
Yeah.
it's not immediate, and I suspect, you know, this is part of a a transition is where the audience is going. So it's not like a red rag that therefore we shouldn't consider it. I think the challenge really is about this. It's a transition, and I think it mentioned universality. I think there is still an issue about universality, that especially with the economics of broadband. There are a lot of families who don't have full broadband connection still. And are we just going to abandon that audience because it's just not convenient? So I think there's a sort of a transition over this period about CBBC going, okay, go where the audience is, absolutely right. But I do feel that in the short term, the minute you take it off linear, you're making a statement that it's actually not part of it's not part of the daily EPG schedule, even if kids aren't going there. So it is a statement, and we've seen it with BBC Three. They came off, and then they realised they needed to put it back on for that very place. I think it's slightly ironic we're doing this the day after CBBC gets an award.
And I think that happened with BBC Three as well.
Yeah,
that was announced.
Yeah, but I think that actually far more fundamental than this is not so much about CBBC on linear. It's why isn't CBBC content being seen on iPlayer? The Children's Media Foundation did some stuff with Kids Know Best, and there was a panel, and it was staggering. I was really surprised how few kids knew that iPlayer was a streaming service with kids' content on it. I have a bit of a vested interest in this. When I was at BBC Children's, we actually lobbied to get a BBC Kids iPlayer, and it went all the way through the ranks. We got it. It was built. We did really well for about 3 years. I think it was at one point capturing 20% of all iPlayer traffic. But then for some reason, technically, it was considered to be a technical overhead, too many branches, all of that sort of stuff, and different regime, then retrenched, and it became one iPlayer again. So I think the BBC absolutely needs to go. If we're talking about taking kids' programming off linear, there's got to be a plan, a transition. You've got to spend a lot more time cross-marketing iPlayer and really selling explaining what iPlayer is to kids. And it needs fundamental, coming from a product point of view, it needs a real overhaul to make that a loved product. When iPlayer started, it was cutting edge. Now kids, almost smirk at it compared to something like Netflix. It's got to have the features, the delight, the emotion that you want from an on-demand streaming service.
And I think the main gripe among the producers who were producing for BBC Three when that went offline, I think they thought the thing that really damaged it was the fact that it was the funding cuts. It could go offline, but it needed the money. And the money is the important thing, not necessarily the channel.
Yeah, and if you're online, whether it's Netflix, or if you're a streaming service, whether it's on, you still need to market and promote your content. Netflix do a whole load on YouTube now. Having been very anti-YouTube, they use YouTube as their major marketing platform to drive to Netflix to be where you see the full shows. So you can't just create content, dump it in a streaming service, and not have any marketing support for it. And that needs to be factored into the plan of this 5-year transition.
Mm-hmm. And is it an opportunity, perhaps, there's a question from Slido here about the 13 to 16-year-olds who the Mr. or Mrs. Anonymous says are perennially ignored by British broadcasters. So what needs to change to make broadcasters want to prioritise the audience? And just for context, I think there's a kind of craze going on at the moment about that age group, about
Minions.
13 to 16-year-olds, going to cinemas to watch Minions wearing suits. And this is at a time when people are saying, cinema's dead. And I think cinemas are even turning them away because they're a bit rowdy, or some of them are rowdy. But, it is possible to engage this audience. So what needs to change?
So with respect to BBC Three and the analogy between BBC Three, and I was a massive what's the opposite, advocate? Like a naysayer to the whole BBC Three going online. And for that very reason, the funding cuts it was a stealth way of cutting the funding for BBC Three, and by extension, a lot of the audience that you're talking about with that older kids and younger adults as a result. And that was a real mistake by the BBC. And actually, I think they hemorrhaged audiences of that age group as a result of that. I feel slightly differently about CBBC moving online. I think that the idea around accessibility to it is a key one. I think that this should be about the government or whoever you want to, whoever needs to take custodian of it, making sure that broadband access exists in every household. It shouldn't be, well, broadband doesn't exist, so we shouldn't put the BBC there. It should be like, we need to do this. Every single home needs to have internet access. It is becoming a human right, so we need to make sure they have access in that way so that they can access public services. So I think that actually it may hopefully kind of close that gap between the people that don't have access as a result. Moving CBBC online, it kind of makes sense because actually we need to get to a point of, you talk about marketing, I think actually what this is about discoverability. And the reason that TikTok and Spotify and YouTube are so good at what they do is because they invest so heavily in making sure that the content that hits you is a content that's right for you. And we are still in this model of scheduled television, of kind of hoping that people recognize brands, etc. And TikTok, for instance, we all kind of talking about TikTok now as part of this industry. But the reason that TikTok is so powerful is that you can move very quickly from a piece of content to a piece of content, and you will get surprise and delight. But you probably have skipped 5 pieces before you got there. Like, television doesn't work in the same way, and Netflix, I think, is having this real problem around discoverability as a result. We all espouse Netflix as being like the holy grail of great television. Actually, I would argue that they are currently in a bit of an issue around discoverability. They have 4 or 5 really strong brands. Stranger Things has just finished. I think a lot of people are going to be turning off their subscriptions as a result of that because they haven't done a good enough job of getting their audience to discover other brands as a result. And that is going to be the challenge for all of us, but particularly those within iPlayer, to kind of work out, well, how do we make sure that this audience, and not just the kids, but also the adults and the parents, which is why I think, I slightly disagree, having iPlayer as one place where you've got kids here and the adult content next to each other, so that parents understand that this is a place where they can get really great kids content, is actually really important. Siloing it just to iPlayer Kids, it's the adults that have to download it, it's the adults that have to set it up, it's the adults that have to make sure that kids understand and discover it. If you can do that through the Hero app, that may be a better strategy, but we need to be investing a lot more heavily into discoverability, into making sure that technology is as good as it can be, and that it can rival YouTube and TikTok, etc., in making sure that we find those brands.
Let's hear from Maddie.
I'm just coming back to the question about 13 to 16-year-olds and picking up on what you just said with Netflix. I think the thing is, they are 13 to 16-year-olds. In my personal experience and generally talking to them, Netflix is their go-to place. Stranger Things, as you say, is finished, but Heartstopper has been incredible. There is at the moment a real wave in Netflix, the same with The Year That I Got Pretty, Amazon, really serving that audience really well for the first time. And, again, I don't know where that sits within the UK place, because actually this is part of a bigger conversation, and I think Mark rightly says about what iPlayer for kids or for teens is going to become, what it needs to become to start to have any weight with the teens that are going to those streamers. And it won't be long before it'll be the same with children's as well. So that broader conversation is the one we need the BBC to be engaging with us in, I think.
Just a quick point. I don't feel entirely happy about the idea that CBBC is going into digital ghetto, because it sends a statement. It says this is less important. And in an ideal world, we'd love there to be universality of access across all households, but we know that's not the case. We know there's real adversity in many, many households, and as soon as you put it in an online space, you'll get fewer people watching it. It will mean less, and it will have less cultural significance in the long term. And I think in the long term, even as the streaming world develops, there will still be a place for terrestrial broadcast. I agree very much with Mark that how to promote these services and how to increase discoverability is key, but it's yet again children. We're going to make a sacrificial lamb out of children and children's content first, having had a failed experiment with BBC Three, and shove them into digital ghetto. It will mean fewer households get access, fewer discoverable shows get national broadcast platform. I don't think it's a good thing. It's a difficult audience to program for, But I don't think it's a welcome development.
If that's what happens, though, but if we take the money that is used to put a broadcast TV channel on and invest that into making this content more discoverable in a new way, like the value, I think that, I might be misunderstanding what you're saying, but I think part of what you're saying is that like, actually there are some parents, not just they don't have access, but aren't willing to let their kids on the internet because of the dangers that exist there.
I think there are households where there's real poverty, both in terms of decent broadband, decent devices, time with adversity, where they will get less access to digital channel, but also the main broadcast costs are infrastructure costs, they're sunk costs. You're still going to have programming costs, whether you're streaming them or whether you're showing them on a terrestrial broadcast platform. I don't buy the argument that you necessarily reduce costs dramatically because you change the distribution method. You're still going to have to make the choice.
It's not necessarily about reducing costs, but it's certainly you free up costs to kind of move it into, I mean, you know...
You free up airspace, for sure. But I'd like to see an argument that you free up costs.
But I would actually argue you need to be putting more money in.
Absolutely.
Because discoverability, you know, in linear, discoverability came from being in the top 5 of the EPG, which was, you know, part of a public service gift, you know, from the regulation. That's why we've had those channels, BBC One, BBC Two, etc. If you take that away, it's finding, you know, the needle in the haystack, and you need to put more money into then working out where kids are, talking to them, telling them that there's a great show coming up.
Part of this huge constellation, and it becomes much more costly to get attention.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And also, this is in the context of Netflix changing its business model to bring in ads, which obviously wouldn't happen necessarily with the BBC, you know, unless its funding model changed. So no one has really cracked it, and it seems like in that online world, ads are, if you're going to survive, ads are the, you know, a necessary evil, it seems. So it wouldn't be CMC without more BBC chat. So, and this is, I'll preface this with repeating that CMC did invite senior executives, including the BBC's Director General and the Director of BBC Children's, to speak at CMC about these issues, but they were unavailable to attend. So Chris Capstick, can we have your question, please?
Good morning. With all of BBC Children's productions now inside BBC Studios, how do you think this is going to impact independent producers?
Yes, and this kind of carries on from the conversation we were having, I think, about when we were talking about animation, because if the BBC is to do more animation, is there a concern also that that will be with BBC Studios? And so what are the opportunities for independent producers? And yeah, as Chris says, how will they be impacted?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is part of the big thing that the BBC, it would be lovely to discuss with them, is not only is the, you know, a major thing, a major policy and initiative needed about iPlayer and how that transfer is going to happen, they've also got the commercialisation of CBBC, CBeebies, and how that's going to affect indies as we go directly in competition with them, really. I think in many ways, I sort of feel it would be good when it's done. I feel like this has been going on and on and on now for so long. It would be good to get clarity on how long that's going to take. I think that's what we all want to hear. I think the problem is, you know, we as an indie have worked with the BBC and BBC Children's, CBeebies, CBBC for a long time and have made many shows with Kay and Michael Towner in their days there. We have had to invent a new business model for ourselves because this has been on a slow stagger for indies for a number of years, you know, for 10 years really. You know, there was a time as an indie trying to run a business, unless you have got one enormous commission, which we found was unlikely in the BBC model, you need 2 commissions a year to really run a business. I mean a business where you're employing people, you're adding training in, you're really looking at all those things that you should be doing to bring through the new creatives that our genre desperately needs. That became clear that wasn't going to happen, and so we've looked to the streamers. And in terms of going into deeper competition, I think for us it's something we've seen coming, and I'd love to carry on making things for them, but I don't quite know how that funding model is going to work. Ignite, my understanding of Ignite for animation is you give up your IP. Unlikely we'll do that. I think as well, if you even look at the way, we made shows like Topsy and Tim and Waffle many years ago, probably 10 years ago, we're still paying off the money that we had to invest into those productions that were only partly funded by the BBC. We're still paying off those things by, selling the shows slowly around the world. And that's not, as we all get older, Billy and me, isn't somewhere I want to be in another 10 years worth of debt. I'll be literally kicking up daisies. But you go to the streamers and you're being fully funded, and they're very, very different conversations. And I think CBBC have got to become part of realizing that that's what a lot of indies are going to do.
And how do you kind of marry that? Because you also have to give up your IP pretty much when you work with a streamer as well, right?
Pretty much, but it's very, again, you have to weigh these two things up, and we've done that very carefully, strategically. I mean, one, I'd say the streamers are doing the thing the BBC have talked about consistently for 15 years, which is bigger, better, fewer. They never did it. The streamers are now doing it. They actually just want the best properties. They come to you with a fully funded deal. They're, if you like, funding your overheads, funding your salaries, giving you a production fee on top of that. Well, as a business model, that makes much more sense for us as a business than it does to find ourselves still in 10 or 15 years' time in debt.
And I remember that bigger, fewer, better policy being announced at CMC. So if they didn't do that, what did they do?
Well, I think that it's the tough, having never worked in the BBC, I don't know this, I have a flavour of this, if you like, but they have a lot of other commitments, which makes that very difficult. They've got regional commitments, they've got commitments that make going for a couple of really big projects feels like, well, where's that going to go? Is that going to sit in-house with indies? They're bigger decisions, and obviously what's happening with the streamers, they're going with that model, and therefore attracting certainly the best indie talent to do that,
But a lot of that indie talent has a track record, like Daryl McQueen, of they did their first few shows with PSBs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then, because the streamers don't tend to work with, you don't get your first commission from a Netflix or an Apple TV+.
I think track record obviously helps, but that could be track record working with an indie like us and going off to work somewhere else. I think, we've got producers and directors here who are now working with other indies, and that is going to help those indies because they've got, an Apple TV Plus producer credit or director credit. But I think the other thing to remember is there was a time when we were all saying it needs to be wholly British content. I mean, we've just made 14 episodes of Lovely Little Farm for Apple TV Plus with 100% amazing British writers, most of whom we've spent the last 15 years working with and have worked on that show with us. Shot in the UK, all British cast, all British talent, post all done here, delivered here. So, those days of saying, and to be honest with you as well, the rigour of compliance, the rigour of the expectations of what we do in terms of representation in crew and cast is as rigorous, if not more so, than we had with the BBC.
Okay, and we've got a question here from Emily Horgan, which kind of carries on this conversation about streamers. So Emily asks, are the streamers our only hope? And Michael, I'd like to ask you about this, because with Bing and that IP, you've effectively become a streamer yourself because you now have a Bing app that's available internationally, and people pay to subscribe to that.
Yes. This is very complex. Everything's changing so rapidly. I think I'd like to say that I still think we're just in the infancy of these changes. We're 15 years in. 2007 was the key year. The iPhone, AT&T, multiplexing down copper wires, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, really scaling. We're still at the beginning. And I think you pointed something out. I mean, Daryl McQueen are one of the leading companies globally in this sphere. We've all benefited from a legacy of huge terrestrial broadcasters with amazing skills and education and building culture and training, and we're still benefiting from it, and we need to see it clearly. in 15 years' time, trying to manage how do we produce things for a time in the future when it's going to be different to what it is today, and that's accelerating. What we've ended up doing in that pyramid of complexity is putting the audience first. Number one, the audience. Number two, the audience. Number three, the audience. So our view is we want to be on terrestrial platforms and on Catch-Up and on Amazon and on YouTube and on Netflix. And we've developed our own mobile app, which had a lot of pushback, like, this will never work, it's too crowded, nobody will download it. We've had more than a couple of million downloads in just under 20 months across 3 countries. And we're now scaling up our localization efforts. Our addressable audience is about 500 million right now. By the Q3 of next year, it'll be 4 billion people. And I can see us having 30 million people at the end of that app. That's really significant, and it's really exciting. And so I think, as you look at these tumultuous, accelerating changes, there are really huge things to love. You know, they really are, and I'm an optimist too. I mean, you look at Anishwar last night, what a fantastic demonstration of a young talent who's got an iPhone and is reaching a global audience, right? There are so many exciting things, but I think we see ourselves as being an organization that has a relationship with an audience. That's what we do. And we're agnostic. It doesn't really matter what the platform is. The other thing we know, just to finish, is that 70+% of all engagement with Bing is on a mobile device. It's probably the big screen on a Sunday morning. It's probably dad's iPad on Wednesday evening at tea time. It's mum's iPhone when you visit the cousins. We want to serve their needs and be agnostic about what these platforms are. But I come back to my first point, which is we're still all benefiting from the brilliance of a public service broadcasting culture that has trained people, gained audiences, gained skills, and we can't take it for granted.
Because it was the BBC that commissioned Bing, it wasn't
It was,
Netflix.
yeah. Kay and Jackie commissioned Bing in the very early stages, and they were brilliant advocates for a show that allowed children to speak like 3-year-olds and tell these kind of stories very dramatically. You know, would we be able to do that in a constellation world where CBeebies is not terrestrial, where we can't launch the show on a terrestrial platform, and then we have to go back to Mark and come up with a strategy for £10 million worth of promotional spend just to get the show noticed. And in fact, those are the sorts of challenges we're now meeting, let's say in America, where in the last 6 years, terrestrial broadcasters have lost more than 60% of their audience. And it's already a constellation situation.
Sita.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up, I agree so much with you, because I think so often we look at today's boom and our growth and forget all those years when the green shoots were watered and the plants were fertilized and it's all bloomed. And actually, at our peril, we forget the history, the legacy that
We're
caused
standing on
it.
people's shoulders
And I think
every
in this
day,
constellation world, and which is why, because at the end of the day, the world is moving, and the pandemic has expedited changes. You can't put things back. However, when you reimagine a world for today and tomorrow, we forget at our peril what we invested, and we need to hold on to this in this reimagining of the public service landscape and what we mean in terms of our domestic ecology, which fuels the global. So I think it's not either or, it's both and how do we protect both?
And there's a question here from Tony Cook about yesterday evening's speech by Ben McOwen-Wilson of YouTube UK and Ireland and our reactions to that. And just to kind of set that up, it struck me how he was kind of bigging up YouTube's public service remit, you know, as a very commercial entity. And we've been talking about the BBC potentially becoming more commercial, and then Apple TV Plus, as you said, Maddie, you know, being very on it in terms of its diversity and inclusion off-screen, so acting a bit more like a public service broadcaster would, and it commissions a lot of factual, you know, big David Attenborough style stuff. So we're seeing, are we, because you can take the YouTube speech on face value and it all sounds great, but really it sounded a bit like he was advocating for YouTube to kind of basically become the de facto platform for all kids' content, but without actually investing in any original content.
Yeah, a bit of a disclaimer. I have to do a little caveat here because I was involved in Sunflower TV, which he gave a really big plug for. And that actually was, you know, the relationship with YouTube on that is they're our distribution platform. We could never have done a pan-Europe industry volunteered content going to every, all of the different communities of Ukrainian refugees across Europe through any broadcaster infrastructure. It just would have blown your mind. YouTube could cut through all of that, and that's why we went with them. So I think I took away yesterday that he was saying YouTube is now a grown-up, mature distribution platform, and stop sort of thinking we're not pulling our weight in terms of the security and all of those side of things, and stop thinking that we're necessarily your competition. We're going back to what we were saying earlier. We've got the attention. We're the platform for attention. So work with us. And I think that's interesting, because it means they're not going to put the money into the content, but they are saying we could be your route to market to reach this audience. And I think that then throws a bit of a question for all of the people, for the broadcasters and the funders and the streamers, is going, well, how do you play with YouTube if they're providing the distribution, they might be providing ad revenues, but they're not putting the bulk of the investment into development in?
Yeah, it's just a different business model. I mean, I think that was fundamentally what my takeaway from last night was. I mean, he used the example, a very good one, of Moonbug, and they've used, private funding to make a wealth of programming, and now a lot of it is also on CBeebies and CBBC, so there has been some sharing of that. But that is a possible business model for us to be very honest about. Could be the way some indies might go. I don't think we will, but to find investment, be great storytellers, and be a mini Moonbug, or a big Moonbug.
But would you say that Moonbug is an example of great storytelling?
Well, it's found its way on CBBC and CBeebies.
But that was controversial, and I don't think...
It must have some, I would say.
That's an interesting question in its own right, and part of that is a bit like, how do you get audiences to press play and get in there quickly and go through the sync of it, and the low quality content, high quality content, etc. It comes back to the fact that YouTube are this whole thing about, are they a publisher, are they a distributor, are they a Samsung TV, or are they a BBC? It's like, they want to shy away from taking responsibility of the content they put up there, because it can land them in very hot water as a result. My view is that, look, I'm a parent of 2 young children, right? If you give me the choice of letting my kids watch iPlayer or YouTube, it's iPlayer all day, every day. Because that walled garden approach, which me and Mark worked on quite strongly when I was working with him in online, this whole kind of walled garden thing that gives parents the safety and security to know that they're not going to end up either on content, you can all talk about the scary content that exists on YouTube that we don't want our kids to watch, but also the IP exploitation of people making their own films with Thomas the Tank Engine, things that are getting more views and hits because they're using their toys to make something. Then I'm sure there's lots of kind of Bing rip-offs that exists on YouTube, and you spend most of your time trying to figure out how you make sure you protect your IP on YouTube. That conversation is not happening, in a way that it needs to happen. Whereas if that happened on iPlayer, where there was a Bing rip-off that appeared on iPlayer, you'd be up in arms, and there's a...
I'm just going to interrupt, just because we are really rushed for time, so there's a few things that have come in from Slido. Sorry, Maddie.
That's all right.
So there are a few questions come in that probably just best to address kind of more widely. So international public service broadcasters are obviously facing these issues, and countries like Denmark have also taken their children's public broadcasting fully online. So I think there's a desire for the industry to kind of talk more with their industry partners. I just have to leave that one there. And then we did also have a question about the commissioning process, and there's plenty of specific commissioners' sessions about this process during the conference. So to whoever who asked that question, you'll find that later on in the week. And finally, although we are pushed for time, just a reason to be cheerful, because I think it's always good to end on that. So who wants to leave us with that?
I think I'll say very quickly, we do need to grasp, I think, instead of always looking backwards what the future could be for most of us in this auditorium who are passionate children's creatives in some way or other. And whether it's with the streamers, as I say, whether looking at a business model that might match YouTube, because YouTube's not going to go anywhere. You know, what we can't do is, at the moment, because as I said, we've got the government, we've got France, Australia, Canada. They're going out there and making deals with the streamers. They're making big deals. And we are known, as the guy said last night, as some of the greatest creators of kids' content. Paddington, all the Dahl stuff, Harry Potter. We need to make sure we're not so busy worrying about what I think is a pretty big deal the BBC have got to sort out, that we're not getting out there and really finding and seeking those opportunities. And I think it's an exciting time, a really exciting time for British-made content.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. The flashing red light is going off.
Oh.
Yeah.
So, but you can also speak to our speakers outside. So yeah, thank you once again to our sponsor for this session, Factory. So we now ask that everyone clears the room as quickly as possible so we can set up for the next session.